savings in value for money. Will you provide the calculations supporting this claim of $21.1 million?
This is a question that we had last night. Thank you for the question, Mr. Holmes. This is, actually the number's incorrect. It's not 21%. But I want to talk about the essential issue behind that. And this is about risk and about the shifting of risk, who pays for cost overruns and the cost of the project. And the work that we have done, and this absolutely is what we believe to be the case in terms of what Deloitte has told us, is that in a public-private partnership, the shifting of risk moves away from the owner, in this case the city, over to the company building it. You can calculate that in a way that you'd like to do that, and there are ways to do that. This is about shifting risk away from taxpayers to ensure that taxpayers are safe and harmless. With the design bid build, that risk remains very much with taxpayers. And I want to say again that the issue of a fixed price contract for design bid build is not that way. And if Mr. Holmes looks at the website again, you'll see that it's a design build. That is the first step to move to a public-private partnership. The contractual arrangements between the owner and the builder becomes much more complex, and that's why you move in toward a public-private partnership. Absolutely critical. So we're talking here about an issue of the risk transfer. It's very simply that the risk rests with the builder and the operator over the 30 years. And they are getting returns from that. But I also want to state as well that the company that's building this, a private sector, builds it for the design bid build and for public-private partnership. It is a private company doing it. In both cases, they make profit. So to say that, imply that one side, the public-private partnership, is only dealing with the private sector is completely false. We do not have the expertise to build these facilities, and we contracted out for someone to build it for us. But we're looking over the long-term sustainability and operation and maintenance of a facility that is incredibly expensive, $250 million. And we are absolutely convinced and know certainly that the information we have is fine. Works well. We'll save $20 million over that 30 years. And we received the federal funding. No question about that. So I can't be more clear than that. It's a description, a definition of risk, and the risk moves away from the public sector, from the city, on a public-private partnership, but stays the same on design bid build. You as taxpayers will be on the hook for cost overruns or delays.
Now, this portion of the debate, we're going to take questions from the floor. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to get a show of hands from those of you that would like to ask questions, media included. How many of you have questions for the mayor? Raise your hand. And how many of you have questions for Mr. Holmes? All right, well, we'll start with Gary? Vince? Good question. Yeah, do you have a microphone for just
I think this is for me.
Yes. If this is a referendum and it's supposed to be run in the same way that a regular election, civic election is run, then why do we have a map of the city, which is a postage stamp, when you could put it 4 times that large and you wouldn't get trouble with people finding their way to the poll?
Just to be clear, are you talking about how we're advertising the polling stations?
It's in the paper today.
Well, this is, first of all, this is not an election. It's a referendum, so we're not electing people to office. But we have chosen virtually the same polling stations, 3 per ward. It was 10 wards. And if it's better that we have it in a map to show that as opposed to the written lines where they are, maybe we would look at changing that. But we're doing the best we can. It's a shorter period of time that we have this election happening, or this referendum happening, 7 weeks after council passed the motion. And I think that we're trying to be as helpful as we can. If you go to the website and type in your address. It tells you the location of where you go. We'll be in the papers again on Saturday, I believe Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday as well, to depict where the polling stations are. But the Local Elections Act says that a referendum should be conducted in very similar fashion to an election, and we've done that. We try to do the best that we can.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I've operated a business in Regina for 23 years, and I'm decidedly somewhat to the right on the political spectrum. But this proposal makes me decidedly nervous. I'll tell you why. It seems to me that the council has been baited into choosing the P3 model as a price for the possibility of a $58 million grant from the federal government. And the and political preferences aside, it really confuses us taxpayers. Council based its decisions upon recommendations by Deloitte LLP, which is an international consulting firm. Deloitte is known to favor the P3 model, but Deloitte, from what I read in the report, was also assisted by AECOM, A-E-C-O-M, which is a giant U.S. firm of 45,000 employees, and they assisted Deloitte to prepare that report. AECOM is likely to be one of the bidders. Another is Viola Water, based in France. AECOM basically is based in the U.S. And what bothers me too is the council seems to have accepted without question all the numbers presented by Deloitte. I haven't seen any evidence that other consultants were asked to verify those numbers. So I have a number of what ifs. What if the numbers are flawed? What if errors, design changes, and regulations cause cost overruns? What if the project manager demands changes to the deal? Does council really believe they can win a legal battle with a multinational giant? And what if the feds renege on the grant? I know this is a lot of questions.
A lot of questions, and you've got to give me some time to answer them, because I made some notes here, and thank you for that. The first question of the $58.5 million, that's the only source of funding for the federal government. Build Canada Fund has been filled for a number of months. It won't be renewed until 2014. So that source is not available. When it is available, though, there's a screen for projects over $100 million to be looked at through P3 Canada once again. Now, you may or may not like the fact, and I may or may not like the fact, I'm not going to say either way, whether I like it that's only money is available only for P3. But if you have an issue with that, please talk to your federal government. Don't make the citizens of Regina suffer for that by losing the money. The issue is with the federal government, not with the city of Regina. We are trying to access money to stretch our tax dollars and keep the pressure on taxes going up. That's a critical aspect. Now, I don't have all your points, sir, that you mentioned, but I'll see if I can get a few of them. Deloitte is a world leader in this. There's no question about that. They are one of the best in terms of not just of P3s or financing, very complicated international, national financing for different companies, but they also do auditing. Like they audit the QP books as one example. They do the national books for QP. So they're very much accepted as the way to go. They're not the only one, but there are others. We did a competitive bid and selected this company. And AECOM is also there working with them, and I just can't imagine AECOM going on the bid when they're doing the work in the background. It's a conflict of interest, they wouldn't do it. They're being paid to do the work to set this up, but not to bid on the work, so that won't happen. Now, we can talk about what ifs all over the place. What if, and we can all talk about difficulties. The ones I know about is that the money is committed by Ottawa, it will be here, there's no condition to it, it will be here. If we approve a P3, and you vote no on the referendum, we will receive the $8.5 million. End of discussion. If we talk about project changes, issues, the very precise reason we're going for a P3 is because issues, you mentioned change orders or project manager changes. The project manager is part of the consortium. If they change the design of this, they take the responsibility financially for it. This is precisely the reason we're doing this, is that we put the risk back on that company, not on taxpayers. Now, if we had a change order, if we decided as a city we want to redesign something, then that's quite different. But they submit by way of RFP, the three that will be left standing to do this, they will submit their design and how they're going to build it. And that's what they've got to do. If they decide there's issues that they didn't anticipate, that didn't come out in the RFP, that's their fault, they pay for it. Taxpayers don't. On a design bid build, if a builder says, gee, I don't like this, or there's something in the ceiling I didn't see, or there's a change here, taxpayers pay that. The risk goes right back to you as taxpayers. No question about that. I'm not sure I got all the points to it, but the contract going forward is going to be complicated, but it is based upon the template that's happened in successes before. And I want to tell you that they work. Now, Mr. Holmes can talk about ones that didn't work, and there are some that don't work. And there's some design bid builds that are successful, and some that don't work either. But I'll tell you one that did work, and that is the one that's in Kananaskis, that just dealt with the flood that happened in Alberta. EPCOR, which did the P3, was responsible for fixing out washed out bridges and repairing the pipes in the ground. They did all that, and taxpayers didn't pay 1 cent. The Alberta government saved an estimated $2.41 million compared to the traditional design approach. That was a 3.89% savings. So I can talk about, we can all talk about great successes of P3s, but they don't apply to every project. This kind of complicated, difficult project, it does. So I just know we've done the work. I trust the people I've worked with in our administration and with our consultants. You know, we have skin in the game here as council. You know, we're elected to act on your behalf. And to me, it's important of accountability. We are accountable to you. The information from Water Watch, they're not accountable to anyone. And you can't hold them accountable because when this referendum finishes next week, this report from Hugh McKenzie, which totally misses the point on interest rates, is gone. It's gone. So either way, how we go through this, we're accountable for the design bid build that comes up or the P3. I stand by those numbers. Our city council stands by those numbers, unanimously agreeing to them. Is it a perfect document? It won't be, but it will be a very good document that protects the interests of taxpayers and allows a fair rate of return to any company as they would a design bid build or a P3. So I hope that answers your questions. I'm not sure. Thank you.
Thank you. John, you have a question?
My question, I'd like both of you to give us your viewpoint on the question, what your thoughts to the question would be. So I'd like both of you to speak on this. My concern isn't with the building of it right now, but it's down the 30 years down the road, and the risk factor that is put on. Like you mentioned, the Calgary flood, and the risk was with the P3 was just a private company. There's the Hamilton and the spill there, which risk was with the partner in the P3 project there. The other cost that I see that companies could have is changes to the environment with regards to the water that flows downstream with pharmaceuticals and the changes over 30 years that might come that require adjustments to what we just built in this year. So my concern is with all these and millions of dollars of costs with the flood in Calgary, the spill in Hamilton, and the changes that might require over 30 years to the environmental requirements for the type of water, and that is now passed on to the third party, the private party, which seems to be a benefit, but then when they go bankrupt or they come back, no business is going to lose millions and millions of dollars without recovering that cost, which would then turn back to us with higher income, because we have to pay for that eventually down the road with our fee. So I'd like both opinion of what do we have down the road for those type of situations.
Appreciate that. Thank you very much for that. Just one correction on the Hamilton project. The Hamilton project was not a P3 at all. I know that's been discussed in this forum last night, it was discussed in the media. It was a sole source contract, not a P3. And Hamilton did not do his due diligence as we are doing due diligence on our company. And the company went bankrupt. Now we got a problem. This is precisely the work of what we're doing to help deal with those issues of problems of financial accountability. Part of what we're doing in the initial screening of companies is to look at their financial capacity, because they're going to put money on the table initially. These are our initial taxes that we have to deal with. So we're going to look at that. We're going to look at what they've done around the world. Have they built these before? What are the successes? What's the outcome? We'll talk to those who run those facilities around the world, around North America as well. Have you, we'll look at Abbotsford, we'll look at, there's several companies we can talk, different ones we can speak to in the Britannia Main Water one, Moncton, we can talk about Tabor. There's several different ones. We'll see what is your experience with this company, and we'll find out what happened. What's their loan capacity? So we will do the research and work to be done initially to feel comfortable and safe. Now, is everything foolproof? No. Your answer to the question of what happens over 30 years. What we can do is a model to talk about what would be inflation over time. That includes labor, materials, a host of other inputs that drive the cost over time. And that's an important element to do that. And it's done all over the world, it's done with P3s to do that. And if there's a change in standards, there would be a negotiation to talk about what that would look like. If there's a problem though, if there's a breakdown, if they're not meeting the license that they're supposed to do for emissions, they bear the cost of that, not the taxpayers. They bear the cost of that. And they know, eyes wide open going in, that's what they're going to be doing. So, no one can tell you what can happen in the future. And to say that is unfair. On the other side, to say there will be a disaster. What you can do is develop a contractual relationship that depicts contingencies and what could happen and whose responsibility is for what. No question about this. Absolutely confident that the contract that speaks of a relationship that over 30 years will benefit the city because of lower costs, and those over 30 years that revenue stream is important to them. At the end of the 30 years, we will have a fully maintained, up-to-speed operational facility that we can determine whether we want to continue with that company, have the city do it, or another company. So the machine doesn't shut down in 30 years. It continues on for quite a number of years after that. So I hope that answers your question. I know Mr. Holmes may have an opinion or two on that one.
And I think you put your finger on one of the key issues that we have. The estimated cost of this over 30 years is about $700 million. So in total, the project, both the construction of the plant on the city's estimate and on the cost of operating going forward, so we're looking at $1 billion over that time period. That same British Treasury Committee I talked about earlier, they took a look at P3s and they said one of the problems with this is they're inflexible. You're negotiating a contract to try and foresee what is going to happen 30 years out. Now the problem is, we all know, water has always been an issue. We live in a semi-arid climate. We had the environmental scientist come in and talk to us. She said, in this drainage basin, in the Wascanic Basin, in a typical year, the evaporation exceeds the precipitation. We're dependent on that water coming down the glaciers. And we know that they are melting. Okay, so that's the first issue. The whole ecosystem is changing around us. And so we're looking 30 years out. That same British Treasury Committee said, well, why are these things, why are these so popular? And they said that they're addictive for bureaucrats because you get something now and you pay for it later. Those are those long-term borrowing costs. So you're paying those way out. So when something needs to happen, when the systems change, as requirements go up in terms of how we treat that wastewater, or in terms of the flow, it's going to flush and dilute whatever we're putting in there. So that changes over time. We're going to have to go back and negotiate with that company. But the reality is we are at that point going to be locked into a 30-year contract. We are probably in the weakest imaginable bargaining position to try and drive a deal with that. So they got the expertise, and all the employees are long gone. They've got the plant, they're the mills, they're operating it, they're keeping it running, and hopefully successfully, everything's going fine. And now we're putting additional demand on them. So they're obviously going to want to be paid for that, and we don't have much choice. It's not like we can re-tender at that point in the process. And that's important too, because again, in the design bid build system, it's in smaller pieces. Very few companies are able to bid on this project. Mayor Fougere talked about this when he was at the Construction Association. They don't work well for Saskatchewan Construction Association. You're not talking for such construction firms, because you're not talking about just building something, because it will be built by the private sector in any model. You are talking about designing it, building it, financing it, and operating and maintaining, taking on that 30-year agreement. The Hamilton one was a local company, and it said it had world-class technology. It would make Hamilton a leader in terms of this field, and it would be a huge industry and a way to generate the local economy. But it did. It ran into trouble in a couple of years. It got sold. It got sold 5 times in the term of that agreement. Okay? And it was dumping raw sewage into Hamilton Harbor, and the company did not pay to clean that up. The city paid to clean that up, and that's the problem. These things are consortiums. The one in London, England is called Thames Water, but it's owned by a merchant bank out of Australia, Macquarie, which I think is headquartered in Brussels for tax reasons. Before that, it was owned by the Germans, RWE, which used to run Berlin, and they paid them $800 million to get out of that contract with RWE, and another $800 million to get out of the contract that Berlin has with Veolia. So getting out of these contracts, if you're getting burned, and people do get burned, is very expensive. I mean, these are the big companies, these are the big guys, these are the respectable ones, RWE, Veolia. There was a referendum in Berlin. The referendum wasn't about getting rid of it. The referendum was about opening the books, and the books were open. And what they found out was they'd been overcharged. And the German regulator, because they have a regulator for public utilities in Berlin, in Germany, they said that they've been overcharged and they've been like 18% on the water rates and already immediate rollback. So that's the kind of thing you run into. Okay, you've lost control of this. When we're running ourselves, we'll have issues, but we'll be in control. And the operation of that plant will be the responsibility of City Council. And people go to the City Council and talk about how they think it's running. So that's key in this process, that issue of democratic control.
Thank you. I don't Chad have a question. Anybody else from the club? Chad?
Good evening. My question is for Mayor Fougere. For those that don't know me, I'm Chad Novak. I ran for mayor last year, so I have experience in a lot of this stuff, and I am a CMA, and I remember P3s was a big thing that we studied a lot, and I remember it being a very controversial issue going through studies. And I don't blame anybody for being confused by this, because it is a very confusing situation. What I believe that City Council's job is not to tell us how to vote. It should be telling us what both sides, the pros and cons are. That's what I'm trying to do on my website, Chad from Regina. Unfortunately, they're not. Now, my question to Mayor Fougere is, if P3s, you mentioned that there are other federal funding available. In 2014, there will be. And there has been in the past. You've been councillor for 15 years. This project has been going on for a number of years. Why haven't we applied for other federal funding, as other municipalities have? And why can't we wait simply a few months until 2014 to apply for other funding? Secondly, if the P3 is such a good option for us, why are we not doing it for the stadium? If you say you have a concern for our tax dollars, you have no problems raising our taxes for the stadium, but yet you come and tell us that you're going to try and save us $276 a year for 4 years, yada, 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 without supporting that.
Okay, 2 questions, but maybe give a chance to answer those.
One final question.
I might be able to...
One final question. Finally, specifically to the question that is on the referendum, the way it's worded, I just thought of this tonight. The way it's worded, technically, if people vote no, they're not supporting a P3, are they? If they vote yes, they're supporting a design build bill. If they vote no, they're not supporting a design build bill. You can do whatever you want.
Lots of questions there. The first one is about funding and the source of federal funding. There is only one source available, I'll repeat that again. That's through Public-Private Partnerships Canada, P3 Canada. That's the only source. The Build Canada Fund that's here next year, as I said earlier on, there'll be a screen. They haven't announced it formally, but they said in the budget earlier this year, the federal budget, that there'll be a screen of any project over $100 million must be screened through P3 Canada first. So we're right back to where we were before. So the suggestion is that we wait a few months. The longer we wait, the less likely we will meet the December 31st, 2016 deadline. And if we do that, there's no guarantee that the province will not fine us for that, saying you're not meeting standards by that date. So I'm not keen on a delay just to wait for money that may happen when we have the money today. We have a guarantee of $58.5 million on the table today. And that's good for taxpayers. That's important. There may be funding in the future, but we can't wait. We don't have the opportunity. There's not the luxury for waiting. With respect to the stadium, it is a public-private partnership. It's design, bid, build, finance. It's a public-private partnership. So that works today. With respect to the notion of the ballot, I would just say this. The council has approved unanimously a public-private partnership. We are not about to go back and revisit this to some other variation. We've done our homework. We've done our due diligence. And if the wisdom of the city is that they say, we reject design, bid, build, vote no, and we urge you to do that for the reasons I've stated, that it goes to a P3 by default, because that is a motion from council. That's what will happen. But I want to make one other point clear here that Mr. Holmes talked about, again, about Hamilton. And it was failed. The problem there, as I said before, and I want to read it once again, it was not a public-private partnership. It was a sole source by the city of Hamilton. And they made the bad choice. They didn't do their homework. There's nothing to do with the public-private partnership. It's the ability of that city to do its homework and protect their taxpayers, which we are doing on P3. The issue of interest rates, important element here we talked about. Well, I have information here from CUPE that talked about this during our discussion at council. And their report right here says that the interest rate between private borrowing and government is narrowing, very much narrowing. I said, it's been a matter of public record for quite a while, that the interest rate spread between municipal borrowing and private sector borrowing for water or wastewater plants is not the 2% above municipal rates as the Hugh McKenzie report says, which is Mr. Holmes' one. It's actually 0.5 or 0.5% to 1% spread. Because these are large companies that command that kind of a deal, and they get that. And that's a North American one that's in there. And you don't know the rate until you go to market. That's the key. That's why you can't give a number. Interest rates go up and down for borrowing. That's economics. That's simply the way that it is. You get a bond for 30 years, you lock it in. That's the money that's used, and that's why the stability happens on costs over the 30 years, because a company that does this has a bond for 30 years. It's stability, lower interest rates. This is basic business analysis. You're protected by that knowledge, but the rates are narrow. They're very, very negligible. And given the kind of success of P3s in North America, and more, contrary to what you've heard, more municipalities are getting involved. This Canada is a leader in public-private partnerships, in varieties of that. Once that happens, those rates of borrowing between the private sector and government go down, 0.5% to 1%. That's pretty narrow. Not the big schism or gap we're being led to believe. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, you talked about document. Can I see it? Can I see it tonight? No, you promised people copies of things before the meeting. Can I see it tonight? I'll see it later.
I think this is a pretty important issue. It's right there in front of you. I just want to look at it. I'm not going to keep it or eat it. I just like to see it.
Any other questions from the floor? I have a question then. Mr. Mayor, it seems one of the big part of Mr. Holmes' defense was the lack of information that was redacted from the report. Could that